Honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The conflict of interest in the Ethics Commissioner's term of office will expire in July of 2017, and so far it seems that the government has not taken any steps to find a replacement. When Mary Dawson's term expires, the government has three options. The government could extend her term with another short-term extension, they could leave the role vacant, or they could hire a new full-term commissioner. And each of these three options at present, in the way the appointment process works, has problems. They could extend her term, but that may create the appearance of a conflict of interest and put her in an awkward position, and she may well refuse, since she has been on 2 extensions and has expressed some interest in moving on. She's mentioned that she has not reapplied, and since her continued employment is determined ultimately by the Prime Minister, whom she's investigating for unethical behaviour, this would be a problem to continue to reappoint her. If they leave the role vacant, not only would they be failing to uphold the Conflict of Interest Act, they would clearly demonstrate that their political interests trump all of their petulant claims to be the most open and transparent government in Canadian history. If they appoint a new commissioner, while this case remains open, though, the new commissioner will be put into an immediate predicament, since he or she will inherit an open investigation into the Prime Minister for his personal conduct and his unethical use of private aircraft while on his visit to Billionaire Island. This would also put the Prime Minister into a conflict of interest, since he will be deciding whom to appoint to continue and complete an investigation into his own conduct. An ethics commissioner appointed by the Prime Minister is not a wise way to structure an accountability institution, and likewise allowing a commissioner whose term is ending to reapply or to receive an extension also places him or her into a conflict, since the commissioner effectively serves at the pleasure of whom he or she is supposed to keep accountable. In light of these two conflicts, last week I asked the Prime Minister whether or not he would recuse himself from the appointment process for the new commissioner. And like the vast majority of answers he and his ministers provide, the response was irrelevant, underwhelming, and frankly an insult to the intelligence of Canadians. Instead of upholding the integrity of an appointment system by agreeing that he would recuse himself, the Prime Minister instead just veered into a vague and barely related tangent of credit-taking for the Liberals' exercises in identity politics. It's just another example of the Prime Minister talking down to Canadians through their elected representatives, much like he did yesterday when opposition members asked him over and over again whether or not he had met with the Ethics Commissioner about the investigation. Every single time he stood and delivered the same banal response about being happy to answer her questions. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's actually not relevant whether he is happy or not to answer her questions. We want to know whether he has met with the Ethics Commissioner about the investigation, whether he realizes that he has created a conflict of interest by appointing her for a temporary term, whether he understands that the next commissioner will be in a conflict potentially due to the same investigation, and whether or not he has the personal integrity to recuse himself completely from the appointment process. Canadians, parliamentarians, and the current commissioner deserve to know whether her replacement can finish the investigation in good conscience without conflict.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I understand and I can appreciate the member opposite does have some concerns about the appointment process. And I'd like to provide the member opposite some assurances that he does not need to be concerned. That, in fact, Mr. Speaker, let me make a very clear statement, and then I'm hoping the member opposite will understand and appreciate why it is that I say that. It's important to recognize, since being the Prime Minister, that we have seen a much higher sense of accountability and transparency on many different fronts, and that includes appointments. I would compare appointment processes of the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, and for that matter, many other Prime Ministers, but in particular, Stephen Harper's, to the current Prime Minister and what this government has actually been doing with respect to appointments, Mr. Speaker. We, in fact, did put in place a new appointment process which supports open, transparent, and merit-based selection process. Our aim is to identify high-quality candidates who will help to achieve gender parity and truly reflect Canada's diversity. This is something in which this government has been progressively and aggressively pursuing since it has taken office. And, you know, if you take a look at what kind of results that we have actually seen, under our new process, we have made 122 appointments, of which over 60% are women, 13% are visible minorities, and 10% are Indigenous. Mr. Speaker, Canadians can continue to apply for positions on commissions boards, Crown corporations, agencies, and tribunals across the country, as a selection process for more positions continue to be launched. Mr. Speaker, I genuinely believe that what we have seen through this new process is something in which Canadians as a whole would support. And at the end of the day, you know, the Conservatives can stand up day after day as if they so choose, if they feel that that's the direction and they feel that that's what Canadians want them to do in terms of dealing with this issue. It's up to them as the official opposition. But I suspect that if we shared with Canadians, and if the members across the way shared with Canadians some of the results that I just shared with the House, that a vast majority of Canadians would recognize that what we are doing is far better than what we have seen in the years leading up to this Prime Minister becoming Canada's Prime Minister. That we, in fact, have a government that understands that we need to get those qualified individuals, and there are some other considerations, and we're not talking about political partisan considerations. And a best example, one of the examples I should say that I could use, is even in the appointment of senators. We have more and more senators that are genuinely and truly independent, Mr. Speaker, and I think that that is starting to become that much more recognized throughout the country as this Prime Minister is starting to change the way in which appointments are actually taking place. We see it as a positive, and we would ask for the Conservative Party to get on side and support this process.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, I think it'll come as no surprise to anybody that actually listened to that response that I found it something less than assuring. Mr. Speaker, this member just talked about non-partisan appointment processes right after they just appointed a Liberal loyalist and former cabinet minister to be the official languages commissioner. He told me that they have this wonderful new appointment process that's underway, even as people charged with murder are being released from prison for lack of judges to hear their cases. He is telling us that we should be assured by their appointment process because of all of this wonderful flowery verbiage ascribed to their process. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is under investigation for his own personal ethics and is still retaining for himself the power to appoint the commissioner that will investigate him. It's absolutely ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. The Ethics Commissioner, their appointment is ending. The Lobbying Commissioner needs to be reappointed. They're investigating Liberal fundraising. Mr. Speaker, they are clipping the power of the Parliamentary Budgetary Office. It's absurd, Mr. Speaker.